For the first time in his career, Clayton Young is going to the Olympics. But unlike some other competitors, Young's responsibilities extend beyond the track. Instead of dedicating his entire life to being the best in his sport, Young has to make room for being a devoted husband and father.
There are several parent Olympians, but there are very, very few parent first-time Olympians, if that makes sense. So there's a lot of Olympians that make it great in their teenage years or even as in their early 20s, and then they eventually, after their second or the third Olympics, they're married and then they have kids and they've kind of established themselves as a professional athlete before they have kids.
But in Young's case, he started a family before even breaking into the professional running scene.
Our sport is very fickle when it comes to even financial support. And so there was a lot of faith in the future that things would work out for me as a marathoner. But that didn't stop my wife, Ashley, and I from having a family. That's what we wanted. And we feel like that brings a lot of joy and it keeps me very grounded in a sport that is very individual and very selfish.
592 U.S. athletes qualified for the Paris Olympics, and just 46 of them are parents, 34 dads and 12 moms. However, being a parent may give these athletes an edge. Dr. Jessica Bartley is the Senior Director of Psychological Services at the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee. She says that having to balance multiple responsibilities can be really beneficial for athletes' mental health.
The number of women I've talked to have said being an athlete has made them a better mom and being a mom has made them a better athlete. I do actually think that there's room for more and to diversify a bit. And I also think that sometimes that actually helps athletes, kind of put things in perspective, if you will. I think that that's really important is sometimes when it's not your everything, it actually helps with growth and with improvement and with things that are in their sport.
Young also feels like he's become a better athlete by having a family. For one, his wife is able to help support his goals instead of traveling this journey alone.
She does not get enough credit for what she does. And she was the one that was getting up every night with the baby when we first had Lucy, so I could sleep and recover. She was the one that was taking care of the kids throughout the day when dad was absolutely dead from his workout and he had another workout to go that afternoon. She's the one that's taking care of all of my nutrition and fueling me and feeding me in a way so that I can get the calories and the recovery that I need to be ready for my next workout.
In addition to the physical support, Young's wife is an essential part of his mental game.
After a bad workout or a bad race, she can ask the tactful right questions to help me process it in a positive way to make me a better athlete. She's the real rock in this. And it's been fun to see as I've become an Olympian that people are starting to notice my superpower, and that is Ashley.
As we watch the Olympics, we see the sweat and speed, the power and determination, but we won't see all of the mental training that these athletes have been working on for the past 4 years. Since being hired as the U.S. OPC's first Director of Mental Health Services in 2020, Bartley's created various resources for athletes. Many are optional and can be done one-on-one or in a group setting, but the mental health screenings are non-negotiable.
We do a mental health screen with every athlete's physical health history. So leading into big events or the games, we also have elite athlete health profiles. So they have almost what we would think of as an annual visit. And so all of those kind of include mental health as well as physical health. So those are, again, the protocols or the procedures that are standard for all the athletes. And then we do a follow-up. And the follow-ups are around depression, anxiety, disordered eating, sleep, drugs, alcohol, and trauma. So we will ask questions in all of those areas, just try to get a really good understanding of the athlete's history and what resources they may need in that space.
Many athletes like Young believe their performance depends equally on both their physical and mental states. Young says that toxic comparison is the biggest psychological challenge he's been preparing for. It's easy to fall into a negative cycle, especially since he's been training with other top marathoners, like fellow Olympian Connor Mance.
There is tons of comparison that I have to work through. Connor Mance, he's such a hard worker. He goes into practice and he just absolutely crushes it day in and day out. And his body can handle that and responds really well. There's a reason that he's one of the top Americans in the United States for the marathon. Whereas my approach in training is a lot more slow. My body just doesn't quite get back in shape as quickly as his does. And so those first 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks of a 16-week training block can be really frustrating because I'm getting absolutely worked those first 4 weeks or so.
The playing field starts to even out by week 8, but those negative thoughts tend to creep back in at the end of the training program. Runners tend to cut their mileage down in the last couple weeks of marathon training to re-energize and keep their muscles healthy.
And you're left with a lot of dead time as you prepare for this race. And that's when the mind can really wander, and you have to be really careful. And so that's when the comparison can really step in. And if you're not careful, you can cripple yourself.
Thankfully, Young has learned a few strategies from his college days that help him stay mentally tough. One tactic is called the 3-to-1 method.
What are the 3 things that you did well? And write those down in your performance psychology journal, the things that you did well, and then the one thing that you can improve on. Just because the negative is so much more powerful than the positive, it's that 3-to-1 ratio that as you apply and as you do research on yourself and apply the principles, or I guess the 3-to-1, that's when you see real growth and real change.
Another huge psychological factor of success is confidence, but building self-confidence can be tough. So Young utilizes a few strategies, including cues and power statements.
And these are just simple phrases, and the cues are more mechanics-based, more physical-based. For me, it's something like keep contact with the guy that's in front of you, or pound the ground with my feet when I'm kicking at the end of a race. But then there's also mental cues, power statements, things like you belong or I can do this. Positive, short power statements that are very personal to you that you can whip out in the middle of a hard practice session or a race to kind of give you that mental boost that you need when things get really tough.
During a race, Young breaks these cues into 2 lists, one for each half of the marathon. Many of the reminders in the first leg of the race are helping him conserve energy.
One of them is half eyes, meaning to like close my eyes halfway and to kind of get in this zen, like to just kind of almost fall asleep. And that's kind of that cue. And it's to keep me kind of checked out for the first half of the race. And don't get me wrong, I'll be covering moves and I'll be grabbing bottles and I'll be navigating. But in the downtime, when we're just kind of clipping off miles, I kind of have to bring the emotions and the pressure low as I can, because I know I'm going to need that energy for the second half.
While Young usually keeps these cues to himself, he changed it up to help him push through the Olympic trials. He wrote down all of the statements and then gave them to all of his friends and family attending the race.
So they were the ones that were actually cheering these very specific phrases to me during the first half of the race and then during the second half of the race. And it was really helpful for me to stay present and to focus on what I needed at that time.
Sports psychology has come a long way from the late 1800s, when researchers first discovered the social and performance benefits of competing in groups. Today's top athletes have perfected their route to success so much so that even getting a slight advantage on the competition can be the difference between a gold medal or never stepping on the podium. And according to Bartley, sleep may be the great equalizer at the Paris Games.
And so when you think of the number of time zones that these athletes go across, when you compete internationally, some of the times that they may have a competition or a game and just the jet lag, that's been actually the number one thing we've been working to refine or provide some information, education, tips, tools, is the sleep space. And that we had, when we were looking into it, I think in like around 60% of our athletes were struggling and felt like that was how they could be at their best, was to find ways of sleeping and sleeping really well when you're not in your bed.
And at this year's Olympic Village, the athletes don't have any air conditioning and are sleeping on cardboard bed frames. Aside from rest and recovery, Bartley says another mental obstacle for Olympians is the amount of global attention on them, many experiencing it for the first time.
When you're thinking of badminton or table tennis, when you're looking at fencing and the spotlight it has at the Olympic or Paralympic Games, it's unique and they typically don't get the same like fanfare. So these multi-sport events are really often overwhelming and difficult to manage. And then I think the last unique piece, I was actually talking with a professional sports team recently. They represent their city. Our athletes represent your country. And there's something really cool about that. That's like a bit of a mix. Like there's some added pressure, but some additional pride in that I thought it was really interesting how even one of the pro sports teams here was talking about like, well, you know, again, you're representing the city and it's different to represent your country.
Young says he's definitely felt that pressure since earning his spot on the Olympic team.
This is Team USA, right? Like, we're expecting big things out of our marathon team and Team USA to go get some medals. That can be very intimidating and daunting. Even doing team processing the other day was just an absolutely overwhelming experience of trying on all of the Nike and USA gear and the Ralph Lauren gear and signing a bunch of papers. And it was an incredible experience. And I even crashed after that experience. Like, I got back to my hotel room and I was like, wow, that was overwhelming.
However, Young's taken an interesting strategy to handle the added attention. He's been documenting his training in real time through a docuseries that airs weekly. Young believes this vulnerability, especially in the early days of shaking off the rust, is preparing him for the global stage in Paris.
America already knows where Clayton Young is at in his build, and they've already seen, the highs and lows, especially of those first 3 or 4 weeks, like I explained, where I'm absolutely getting worked by my teammate. But they've also seen me get back in shape. They've seen me reach a level of fitness that is respectable. And so it kind of takes the pressure off, where I've been vulnerable from the very beginning. I've been very open about it. I've not only showed the day in and day out of training, but also I've sat down and done lots of interviews and just talked really frankly and really openly about how I feel about where I'm at in training right now, and how I feel about Paris and what are my goals going into Paris and how I'm going to navigate that.
But it's not just the race that Young and other athletes have to prepare for. For many of these competitors, going to the Olympics will be one of the top moments of their careers. And as you can imagine, reaching such a high can be really disorienting when everyone packs up and goes home.
I know that some athletes go in and they get a medal and they don't feel different. They don't they come home and they're still the same person, or they still do the same thing, or everyone recognizes them in the grocery store. No one does. And so I think there's a lot around those expectations and what do you think is going to look different? I also think that it's, again, did you not meet your goals? Did you not meet your expectations? Did you think this was the big shot and all of your life would change? And that's not the case.
Which is where athletes having other interests outside their sport is extremely helpful. Young is hoping to beat the post-game blues by getting back to normal life as soon as possible, being a dad, a husband, a friend, and always preparing for the next race.
This is my first time going to the Olympics, and I've never experienced it quite before. As a runner, it's very common to actually have marathon blues. It's a real thing that a lot of even just normal marathon runners deal with, right? They pour their heart and their soul into this marathon, and marathons are so fickle that they can go so good or so bad. And so when I think about Paris and the post-race blues, don't get me wrong, I think it's going to happen, but I think the best thing and what we've kind of already put into play is, okay, what's the next race? What's the next thing that I can focus on?
Young will be running the marathon on August 10th. You can find more information about Clayton Young, Dr. Jessica Bartley, and all of our guests on our website, radiohealthjournal.org. Our writer-producer is Kristen Farah. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. I'm Elizabeth Westfield.